All right, y'all, we're back for more of the Mikey interview. If you joined us last week, you would have heard sort of how Mike got into the criminal justice field, a little bit of his background when he worked with the state, how he ended up with the federal government, some of his mentors as he started out his career, and sort of the way that he just stumbled into criminal justice in general. If you haven't listened, it's worth it. Go back, give it a listen. If not, you can pick up where we're picking up today. So here is part 2 of the Mikey interview. Welcome back and happy Tuesday, turkeys. How long have we known each other?
We've known each other for 2 decades.
I am not apologizing for who I am or what I like or the people that I love.
How do I be a wife? How do I be a mom? And how do I be myself and all of that? You didn't see that coming, did you?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like, were they measuring stuff at that point for efficacy purposes to track? Or were you just sort of anecdotally keeping track of things? How did you feel like that worked or reduced reoffending compared to just like traditional probation?
Sorry. They did track it because naturally money was tied to this. So they wanted to see success rates and stuff. And a successful drug treatment program is probably 30%. You know, you're not going to get something way up there because if you did, those numbers are being fudged because, or you're defining success very narrow. Are you going to like define success by getting off probation? Are you going to define success by staying clean and criminal free for 10 years on out? You know, so it all depends on how you define that. And I don't remember what the success rate of CARP and the other program, but I remember that the drug farm, they had a very good success rate. I don't remember what it was, but it was better than the inpatient ones that didn't have the boot camp aspect.
Interesting. Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I don't know.
Because that sounds, I bet to people nowadays, that sounds really wild or like really extreme and something no one would do. But it's interesting that seemed to actually be more effective.
Right.
I'm assuming it was like it was men. And I assume it was also like a younger demographic that was able to like physically participate.
Exactly. Yeah, you had to have a doctor clear you to say this guy's got no heart problem. And you had a
dude, and that's usually the riskiest population.
Exactly.
It's like young men with testosterone still raging.
Exactly. You know, you had a drill sergeant. This guy was a ex-Army drill sergeant that ran these guys, 500 in the morning through the sugar canes. And the biggest complaint that I got from some of them was that the rats would chase them. And they're saying, we're not talking about attic rats or we're talking about cat rats. These things they said were big. Yeah. And so they would complain about that. And, the drill sergeant, his name is probably going to come to me. The drill sergeant would say, well, that's why you wear boots and not tennis shoes. So if they did come up, they wouldn't bite through. So, and I remember it was bad. Yeah. Yeah. The rats were, but the program itself was good. And one time I remember I had this guy in there. They complained about the food, but this guy wanted to be a chef. So they took him in and he said that he was a chef. So they said, okay, well, you can go help, study your stuff, but instead of work detail, because they had to do work details going to be chef. And the food got better. And then the whole program, the actual physical program was 1 year. And then when you left there, you went into aftercare. So you went from there into another aftercare treatment for I think it was 3 months. And then you went out. So it wasn't one of those things where they just released you.
Yeah, they titrated down.
So the food got better. I can remember some of the inmates because they were inmates. I mean, they were actually sentenced to this thing.
Okay.
It was a facility. The inmates coming up saying, "Hey, can so and so stay? Can so and so stay? The food is so good. I can't keep them here beyond this sentence." That's illegal. I'm no, you gotta keep them, Mr. Mike. Keep them here. I'm like, no. And I remember Letty, I would tell Letty that during staffings, I would say, yeah, Letty, they want him to stay. She's like, why? And I said, because they said the food is so much better. She's like, do you blame them?
Dude, that's so funny.
So it was interesting,
Give me 1 second. I need to run to the bathroom. Do you need to take a break?
Yeah.
Just leave it running. That's fine.
Okay.
I'll be right back. My big dummy's in here.
So what do the pups look?
But yeah, I make them hang out with me or else they bark the whole time I'm gone.
Mine's over there sleep on the couch. But
I was gonna also ask you, sorry if I'm changing courses. I was gonna ask you, when you got into the federal system, you were there for like the crack cocaine laws, right? Like the increased sentences.
yes.
So all the stuff you've been talking about up till now was like the state of Florida, right? Like the state of Florida, South Florida, trying to implement treatment programming and things like that.
Yes.
And then you get to the federal side, and at that point you were doing more of the pre-sentence reports, right? Like
Correct.
for sentencing purposes, calculating where they fell in the guidelines for people that don't know.
Yes.
But did the crack cocaine law pass like before you were there and you were just dealing with them after the fact? Or did that happen while you were in the probation office?
No, that happened before I got there.
And it was, for people that don't know, it was like basically they just increased the sentences pretty drastically, right? If you were distributing crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, even though they were chemically the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. And the sentences were so, for crack to powder cocaine was so disproportionate. When I would go to the University of West Florida and just talk to students about crime and its criminal justice course, I would bring a packet of sugar. Back then, they had 5-pound bags of sugar. Now they're like, but anyways, I would say, okay, this is powder cocaine, this is crack, and yet you get the same sentence, if not more, for this than for powder cocaine.
What did you bring for the crack comparison? Like a sugar cube?
No, it was a packet of sugar.
Okay, so like one little sugar pack versus like the big bag.
5-pound bag of sugar. And I said, you're going to get more for the little packet of, drugs than for the powder. And they couldn't believe it. And when I saw that in the law, yeah, it was obvious. I don't want to say who they were targeting. I don't want to say because, it was obviously, blacks were using more crack and the white affluent people were using more powder, and they aggressively went after the crack because they said, well, that has violence tied to it on the streets. So that's kind of how they were able to make the disparity, and they were looking at like first time was like 5 years, then 10, then 20, just for a little amount, like 2.5 kilos of of crack would get you a minimum sentence of 5, if I remember correctly. So we would do pre-sentence reports on these guys, and we would have to make sure their criminal history was correct, because if they had 2 prior criminal convictions of sale of cocaine, if we got them for that third, they were looking at mandatory life, depending upon the amount of they had. And, they would do everything they could to come in and try and tell everybody who was doing what and what conspiracy, and the U.S. attorney would build a case on that. Under the RICO guidelines, they could go after whoever, saying, well, this is tied to this guy. Yeah. And when we would go in, we write what pre-sentence is. A pre-sentence report, in the federal system, you work for the judge. When I was in the state system, we actually worked for the Department of Corrections and not the judge. So we were standing in front of a judge in the state system, and if that judge said, and it actually, Judge Lupo did this to us a lot of times, I want you to take this prisoner, Mr. Mike, and transport them to the CARP inpatient facility. Well, Department of Corrections guidelines said I can't transport a prisoner. So I would sit there and say, respectfully, Judge, Department of Corrections, I cannot do that. Where the federal system, if the judge said you do something, you do it, because that's your employer, basically. So we were basically reinvestigating the case for the judge in a pre-sentence report, in addition to their prior history, criminal history, their family history, education, and all that. So we would have to go interview the U.S. attorney and say, give us the evidence in this case. And so we would go in the U.S. attorney's office, and sometimes they would have these boards with lines going to it. This got cocaine from this guy, this guy, this guy. And we would look at 2 different indictments, and they'd have a list of names, and it was not uncommon to have 10 people on an indictment. And when these defendants got into the court, they would look at their indictment and they were like, I don't even know this person. Who is this person? And it was like, you know that person, right? Yeah, I know that. Well, you're tied to this because the drugs you were being brought in was given to that person.
And
So
that's all part of the way they would structure it when they would label it as a conspiracy, right? 2 or more?
2 or more people.
Okay. And the conspiracy charges always carried more heavy penalties
Exactly.
than just possession with intent to distribute.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's, yeah, if you were in a conspiracy, you were, and they did that with even white collar crimes.
Yeah.
That they would use conspiracies to tie people together.
I remember seeing that with some of the charges when I came in, where it used to bother me the way that they would do those conspiracy charges, because the people who actually had the intent to create the conspiracy and were organizing it were getting the same charge as the people who were on the bottom, who were user dealers. Just some toothless dude in his trailer park selling meth to Billy Bob next door, but he just happened to buy those bags from 5 steps down the chain from the larger organization. And the fact that they would tag them as part of the conspiracy always used to just blow my mind, because I'm like, this guy, this little dork down here who just wants to get high does not feel the same as the dude up over here who's not using and who's making a lot of money.
Right.
And little Bobo down here in the trailer park is making enough to buy his next hit. Like, he's not profiting in the same way. And then they would both get nailed. And then usually the dudes at the top, it seemed like, had less criminal history. So they would end up getting more or less time, and they knew more. So they had more they could cooperate with.
Right.
And then these poor fools on the bottom rung of the ladder got the most time and hit with the worst stuff because they had the most charges, because they were always in and out of jail because of an addiction issue. Dude, that was a weird experience for me, was just looking at when they charged a conspiracy, who actually ended up doing the most time.
Yeah, exactly. The guidelines, the main guy in the conspiracy, and the DEA could prove it, that you were the one bringing in the cocaine, but you gave it to a middle manager, and that middle manager spread it out. So like you said, that little guy in the trailer park, that he may give a little bit to somebody else. You had those little guys below the middle manager that would use and also spread it out.
Mm-hmm.
That main guy, you could add so many points to the guidelines to it. You say he is the kingpin of this enterprise. So if the U.S. attorney and the DA could prove that this person was the lead ringer of the conspiracy, we would add more points to it.
Okay.
Or even the middle manager got points to it. If we could prove that middle guy was distributing drugs to people for them to sell, then he could get points as well.
Yeah.
So the guidelines had that built into it. They had amounts of the drugs and criminal history, and that was all accounted for in that score that you would get to determine where you went. And I remember twins, and this is hilarious. I still remember. I know their names, but I'm not going to say it. They were twins, identical twins. And
basically, their names were Brian and Byron. I mean, not exactly, but right. Weren't their names that close? Extremely close, and then they were identical, right? I had one of those guys on my caseload at the very end of his time.
Right.
Okay. I know who you're talking about.
Now you got to understand, I got in writing pre-sentences around 2000. So the fingerprint was still done by some guy with an eyeglass looking at it. They didn't have the computers that could home in on it and say 99.9% that's his fingerprint. You just had a guy reading it. So when I did the pre-sentences on these two, they sat there in court and they were like, that's not me. That's my brother. And they would say, yeah, that's not me. That's yours. That's not me. That's not me. So Tom Keat, the federal public defender, I remember said, well, we need to straighten this out, Judge. Can we have a continuance? And so Tom said, well, how do we straighten this out, Mike? And I said, Tom, let's put them together. Let's just put them together. I'll bring their rap sheets and they can go through it and figure out who's who.
Because they were charged in the same conspiracy, right?
Charged in the same conspiracy.
And they had to know whose criminal justice or whose criminal record was whose for purposes of points for scoring for sentencing.
For sentencing. Correct. Yeah. And while their points were almost equal, it mattered by 1 or 2 points, which brought one of them up to this highest level and one to the lowest level. Yeah, I do. I'll get it in a second. So it mattered to one of them because he was brought up at the highest level. And I said, Tom, let's just put them together and we'll go interview them and I'll bring the rap sheets. We'll roll it out and we can see because the fingerprint guy can't do it. He tried with the fingerprint guy at first. And the fingerprint guy said, look, they're twins. They're very close. Today's standards, they could tell because of computers. The other brother's attorney, he agreed to it. In fact, he even said, I don't even need to go. You all work it out. And panel attorneys were like that. But anyways, some of them were. Some were very good. So I told Thomas, and he says, well, I don't know if that's really legal or not, if we should do all that. And one's looking at the other criminal history. And I said, well, Tom, how? We don't know.
Yeah.
He says, well, if they both agreed to it, let's go ahead and do it. And I thought we were going to get pushback. So I brought in their criminal, and I mean, it could extend pretty far, and that's how they did it. And they were fantastic. They were like, oh, wow. And they would go through it and they said, yeah, that was me. And they would say, yeah, but that's not me. And they say, yeah, it was. And I remember it came down to, we had a barbecue at the house because somebody graduated and I couldn't be there because I was in prison and I took the rap for you that time. And the other brother agreed. The other brother said, that's right. Yeah, you were in prison. Yeah, that was mine. I'd be like, okay. So, Tom didn't care, I think, because he had the main guy in the conspiracy that had the most criminal points. So that actually reduced his guy a point and brought the other guy up. And I brought the other guy's attorney was going to object to it. But he didn't. I mean, he could have said, but he elected not even to be there. And the other kid agreed. His other brother agreed. Yeah, that one was mine. Almost like my bad. So that's the way these pre-sentences worked. And let me grab something real quick. This is an annotated guideline book.
God, that thing sends a tingle down my spine just looking at that thing.
I know. I have it on my thing just for memories, but this is the annotated, being that there were case law attached to it.
Yeah.
When the guidelines first came out in 86 or 87, these guideline books were only like that. That's how they expanded, So, we would get
with case law and interpretation
of it. Yeah. And then changing it or adding guidelines. And we would have to laugh when the old timers say, yeah, I wrote pre-sentences. They weren't too bad. It's like, yeah, that's because it was only that thick. Now we've got to go through the case law and all that. So it was pretty, it was pretty intensive, but I want to show if I have it. Let me get it. What I'm looking for is here it is. Okay, the sentencing table is done in months. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, yeah. And then the steps.
Yeah. Okay, it's done in months. So when you sentence somebody, if there was no extenuating circumstances, aggravating or mitigating, the judges would go in the middle of the guideline. So instead of a nice, 120 months, 10-year sentence, you could end up with 141 months.
Yeah.
So the family members would be sitting there in the courtroom, and I would sit there in the jury box, and I would hear this probably once a month. All of a sudden, if it was a strong sentence, especially from Judge Collier, 234 months, about the time, so you hear, oh, that's 20 years, that the family would finally figure out this is a 20-year sentence.
Yeah.
One time, I was with Tiffany Egger. She was an assistant U.S. attorney, and Judge Collier. We were hosting the people from one prison, the classification officers, and they asked me, "What do I find out about the guidelines?" And I said, "Well, why everything is done in months and not a year sentence, like 20 years and 8 months? Why is everything done in months?" And they kind of akin it to, well, it's easier for us to put that in our computer system. Nationwide.
Like military time versus AM, PM. Yeah.
So Judge Collier he was funny. He said, actually, I always thought it was because when I gave a hard sentence, it gave me enough time to get off the bench.
I'd be the same way. I'd have to sit there and do the math. I knew 120, and that was about the extent of what I could convert in my head.
Exactly. Yeah, I thought that was an appropriate answer. He was a hell of a judge, he's still on the bench, So when I started, I'll just do this real quick. Well, no, I'll do that later. But go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the thing that struck me about doing probation work, and I never did the pre-sentence reports, but I read plenty of them, was just like how much information you would gather at that phase about their life and their background. I guess because that was for mitigating circumstances. But for someone like me and what you described of being fairly sheltered when you were younger, how impactful was that for you when you started to hear some of the absolute shitstorms these people grew up around, and even like the twins, just how normalized criminal enterprises were? That was their day-to-day life. They were cutting up, joking about it. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that like for you, just kind of dipping your toe into that world?
It was scary and eye-opening at the same time, that there was a whole nother world out there that I never saw, that I may have
Mm-hmm.
read about, but never really knew existed. And you can
Mm-hmm.
sit through a classroom and have these instructors tell you A, B, and C, but until you sit there and experience it, it's hard to understand, and it was scary because when I started in 1991, actually supervising a caseload, you got to understand, we had no cell phones. Yeah, this did not exist. We had quarters in our pockets, quarters that we kept in our cars in case we had to dial for help, or in case if we could not find a location. We had maps. There wasn't no GPS either to find a house. We had maps, and we would always ask, tell us how to get to your house, and they'd give us directions. Sometimes we'd end up in a rabbit hole. Sometimes we'd find it. But if we had to call them, we'd have to go to a payphone and say, look, I can't find your house. And also the danger of not being able to call for
Yeah.
help if you needed it. So one time I went to a house Saturday morning, and I remember Andre telling me the best time to hit this area is Saturday mornings because they're still all asleep. And if they're not home, something's not right.
Yeah.
If they're married and they're not home, something's going on. If they're a child and then they're not home, the mother will tell you something's going on. So I got into the habit of going out Saturday mornings and doing that. I got to one house one time. It was an apartment complex. Knocked on the door. The case opened the door, and he was like, "Okay." He's like, "Look out." And I'm like, "Well, can you show me inside?" So just it's the initial home contact. I got to take a look at the house. It's like, yeah, okay. But he wouldn't let me in. And all of a sudden, I saw his son in the back now. I said, "Is that your son?" And he's still looking. He says, "Yeah, that's my son." I said, "Okay." So I stepped back. I said, "Okay, come on out." I said, "What's going on in there?" I said, "Is something wrong?" He said, no, it's fine. So can I go in? He said, "Not yet." All of a sudden, I hear a door close, the back door, and I see his son coming around the side of the house. And his son said, "Dad, she's coming. She has a knife." So I'm like, shit, now what? You know? And I'm like, is something going on? And sure enough, she steps around. She's got this knife in her hand. And I'm like, crap. I'm thinking the only thing I could think of is knock on a neighbor's door to grab a phone.
Yeah.
And she's like, "You stupid fool." She was yelling at him. And I'm like, "Ma'am." I said, "Just calm down." She said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm his probation officer." Well, she smarted out. She was like, "He's using drugs. He's doing this. He's doing that, blah, blah, blah." So I looked at him. I said, "What's going on?" I said, "Come on over here by my car." I said, "Man, just stay over there." And by then, I don't know if it was a neighbor. It seemed to me like a relative. They came to her and they calmed her down.
Okay.
I felt like that the situation was okay, but I'm like, "You're not going back in there. You need to find a place to go."
Yeah.
And he said, "Okay." I got lucky because as I'm talking to him, this was a pretty main street that this apartment complex, it was a single story, almost like a duplex was located on. I see this West Palm Beach police car go by, and I run out. I'm seeing him run out, and I'm waving my hand to him, and he pulls in. And he's like, "What's going on?" I said, I'm U.S. State Probation, showed him my credentials. And I said, I think there's a domestic. He opens up the door. He goes, "These fools, I'm telling you." He get out. And he knew exactly who they were. But that's how dangerous the situation we were stepping in, because
Yeah.
I don't know what I would have done if that person had not come out to calm the lady down. Number one,
Yeah.
I couldn't leave if they tussle. Now probation officer leaves.
Yeah.
So my only thing was I was going to knock on the neighbor's door and say, "I need your phone."
Were you issued a firearm for the state?
Yes. Well, when I started, the bill was just introduced in Tallahassee for us to be armed.
Okay.
Okay. But there was no appropriations to pay for. So they passed it, said, if you buy your own firearm and you pass the course that you have to pay for, you can carry. So I elected to go ahead, bought my firearm, went to the course, and we were able to carry. But in that case, I wasn't. I wasn't able to carry.
Okay.
And, you know, how does it train you to act in a case like that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. The woman was irate, but she wasn't coming after anybody.
Yeah.
The son was right there saying, "Mom, calm down, calm down." And then I said, finally, the aunt or whoever came out and calmed her down and took the knife away from her. But I mean, it was a dangerous situation walking into something like that, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we were able to carry, but it took a while for us to do it. And again, we had to pay for our own weapon, you know?
Weird.
So, yeah. Um, I'm trying to think.
What was it like going into people's homes for the first time? Because I always thought that was such an interesting sociology experiment. It was so eye-opening. Well, one, for me, it really humanized people. And then you, again, like we were talking about, even just with criminal history, it's really eye-opening, just the different ways that people lived, the way they kept their home, the way they decorated, the squalor or the cleanliness. Just that was really eye-opening. But then also like you're talking about, the danger part was very real when you were just out in this completely uncontrolled environment. I mean, and like you said, you came from a house of like 1 million kids, but military family.
Yeah.
So what was that like, or how did you get used to dealing with that?
It was trial and error. It was, you know, trial and error being, if it was a dangerous case, we would take another officer with us.
Yeah.
And just to be safe, there was one case, and this is when I just started out. And what we would try to do is keep them in the common area of the house, like the living room. We know where the exit door would be.
Yeah.
One case, the case wanted me to see something in the bedroom, and I had another officer with me. I'm trying to remember if that was Rick or if that was Don. I went into the hallway to see the bedroom. And when I got out, the officer was like, "Don't ever do that. Don't ever go in a hallway." He said, "Well, you were lucky I was present, that I could watch these other people, but you got nowhere to go." So
Yeah.
I would learn to trial and error that way and be like, you know what? He's right. I've got no escape route.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have the training that we had with the feds, where we would come in and go through the shoot houses and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I felt like they equipped me pretty well.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
my training academy was pretty extensive. And then we were fortunate to be able to do inter-office or, local training within our office.
Don't shoot. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
had like what I guess you would call old dogs like
Yeah.
you and, some of
Yeah.
the supervisors and people like that I could go out in the field with. So I was also able to learn in the moment. But I can't imagine just sort of being flung out into the world without some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, it's not like you're 6'5" and super imposing. So you've got to have the smarts and the situational awareness to know what's going on. But then I don't think people really recognize how big of a deal it is with your presence, being calm
Well,
and
right.
not coming in like you're out to get somebody. Every time I went out in the field with you, that's just what always struck me, is you had a good demeanor and tried to build a good rapport with people, and genuinely so. And I feel like people at least weren't immediately, most of the time, on edge
Yes.
when you came into the house, because you didn't come in there with like a Napoleon complex and trying to make everybody feel like a piece of shit.
And threaten and all that stuff. Like I never ever in the 30 years of probation work told someone I was going to lock them up. I
Yeah.
never used those words on somebody. One time I had, I tore my pec muscle. And so I was still in a little bit of a brace. And I had to interview this case for a pre-sentence report. So I had to go into the home. And it was a case in which the DEA was investigating the brother of the guy that got arrested. And they took the car. He forfeited the car. When they arrested him, they took the car. So I couldn't find anybody to come with me in the office. So I'm like, yeah, let me do this alone. But I got to be very nice and whatever. So I went to the house to get the background. And I'm looking around, and sure enough, there's that open area for the door. And I'm like, I'm going to stay right here. And I went there and I said, oh, hey, I said, I'm here with probation and I just want to kind of talk to you, get some background information that's going to help him. If you can tell me anything about him that you think the judge should know, that Sandra said, you need to let me know. And I'm going to put that in the report. And so the mother's like, oh, okay, have a seat. All of a sudden the brother comes out. And I'm thinking, okay, this is the one the DEA is investigating. So the brother comes out, he sits down and he's real obnoxious. And he's like, oh, so you're going to help him? You're going to help him? And I said, well, that's what my job is, to prepare this report so the judge can see what your brother was like. And he goes, well, he stole my car and they have my car. They confiscated it. Can you get my car back? So to think, okay, shit, this is the guy. And throughout this conversation, the door knocks. He says, wait a minute. He gets up, walks in front of me, opens the door. Big guy standing there. And I can see he goes in his pocket. He steps outside, closes his door, and in a second comes back and he sits down. And I'm like, shit, that was just a drug transaction I just witnessed. And I'm like, I said, so have a seat. Have a seat. Let's talk about your car. I said, the car was used in this crime. And that's why they took it. He said, yeah, but it's my car. And I said, I know that. And he says, yeah, and he started waiting, but it's my car. Why do them bitches have my car? And I'm like, look, I will do everything I can to talk to the U.S. attorney. I know who's involved in the case. I've worked with them, and we're going to do what we can to get that car back for you. Because is it in your name? He goes, yeah, it's in my name. And I said, okay, that's even easier. I mean, I was doing everything I can. I just wanted to get the hell out of there,
Yeah.
And I didn't even bring my gun because I was, I didn't feel like I could operate it correctly,
Oh, yeah.
Basically. So I got out, went to the car, grabbed the cell phone that I had, and I called DEA. Yeah, I don't think you probably don't remember her. She was a DEA officer. And I said, Sonia, I think I just witnessed a drug transaction at that house. And she said, is this the brother? And I said, yeah. And she said, is the brother 5'10", whatever, kind of pudgy? I said, yeah, that's him. She said, what is he wearing? And I said, he's got a red ball cap on. And I remember that, and whatever clothes. And I remember, I'll go get to that in a little bit. So I gave her a description of the guy. She said, okay, we got it. And the next day, he appeared in court. They arrested him because they had been looking for him.
Yeah.
But that's just sort of getting into a situation and getting out of it where it's like, okay, something's going on here, but I need to be real nice. How can I help this person? He wants his car back, and I mean, I'm not technically lying to him. I mean, I could see, hey, Charlie, you've got his car. What's going, up there? I tried. Sorry. But it was just getting out of situations like that. And I learned early on, and this was one thing I was not good at right off the bat.
Join us next week and we'll have all of this conclude with a third part because we talked for 2 hours. So I'm breaking it up across a couple different episodes. Like I said before, he's someone that I've always looked up to as just being really thoughtful and insightful about how to work with people, how to de-escalate a situation, and has some good insights, I think, about ways that our criminal justice system could maybe incorporate some different points of view to help people. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of cycles of criminal behavior and arrests. And for me, just the 5 years that I worked in it, it felt like a never-ending cycle. And sometimes it felt sort of hopeless, like how does anybody even break into some of these things and get folks what they need? Anyhow, don't take my word for it. He has way more experience than I do and worked across multiple different political climates, the different swings of the pendulum, if you will. So join us again for round 2 or part 2 of the Mikey interview, and join us next week as we wrap up and conclude. Thanks for listening.